Okay, guys. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. So today we have the privilege of a special guest speaker. Today's guest speaker grew up attending Essex Alliance Church from childhood. He attended UVM, studied engineering, and he became involved in Campus Crusade for Christ at UVM. Now it's known as Cru, but it was through his time at UVM. He met his wife Lori while on a summer mission in Czechoslovakia. In 1989, they got married in 1992. And he joined the staff of CCC in 1993. He served in New England until 1997 when he left to serve in Uzbekistan. From 2002 to 2014, he served in Moscow, Russia. And then 2014 to the current, to present, he lives with his wife in Budapest, Hungary, and he ministers all around Europe. He has 3 children. Emma is 23 and married in April. His son Joel, 22, graduated in May and is now working in Chicago. Nadia is in her 2nd year at Western Michigan University, and she studies theater and dance. And so it was a great pleasure that I introduced today's speaker and guest, Keith Beyar.
Dwight, I appreciate that. It sounds bigger, and I don't know, I get nervous when you start having an introduction like that. I'm just here hanging out with the guys, right? And there'll be an opportunity to do some Q&A. We're going to do a little bit of an interview format in just a minute, but I kind of thought with this group, I wanted to just share a little bit of something from the Word just as we begin, as perspective. When I was a college student, I was encouraged to come up with a life verse. I don't know if you've ever taken the time to think of a verse in the Bible that kind of is very meaningful for you and something that you go to for some connection to what's true about Scripture, what's true about our faith. And this past week, a wise man in my life just quoted it during a meeting that we were having. And it reminded me, I hadn't really thought about it in a while. And it's 1 Corinthians 15:58, and I'll read it in just a second. But it just reminded me of that passage, and I've been just thinking about it this week, and so these are thoughts from last night. I usually try to share something that's fresh, and that's why no one asks for my notes before we do anything, because they don't exist. But let me just read it, and then I have just a short perspective that I wanted to just bring into it. And this is Paul, and he's basically talking about the victory that we have in Christ, where it will all end up as Christ comes out ahead. Even though in the world we'll have troubles, but the Lord's overcome the world. I talked about that on Sunday. He said that's the therefore, search for the therefore, and that's what he's referring to, the victory that we have in Christ. My beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. And the part that actually stuck out to me was the beginning, where he says, my beloved brothers, be steadfast and immovable, unwavering. I thought, okay, as I've gone through life, and maybe I've matured, maybe I've just gotten older, I don't know. The steadfast, immovable part, I had to kind of ask, what is that part that should be steadfast and immovable? What are the things that should not change? Because I think the longer that you live, there's more things that you do not want to change, and maybe they should. And what Paul is writing about, he's really saying, you know, the things that you have been taught, the things that are true of our faith, they should not change. And at a simple level, the things that are defining our faith, our salvation, our eternal security, those are the things that don't change. Who Christ is, the Bible is the Word of God, the only way that deal with sin that everyone else has is the forgiveness that comes through Christ alone. That level. And below that, a lot of things we probably should be movable. Because what happens is we have opinions. There's things that we hold dearly, and it's okay because it makes you who you are. You play basketball too. Too meaning with others, I don't play. There's things that we want to defend, we want to speak out against, things that are true of our faith, and those things shouldn't change. But as we go through life, we have to be aware of maybe some of these opinions that we have that are coming into conflict sometimes with our own lives, with those around us. If you look at the church, there's probably 3 generations all coming together on a Sunday. So there's things which, in your preference, they fit, and there's things that don't. I wish it was different. I wish the music was different, or it was earlier, or it was later, or whatever those things are. And we can start to hold those things in front of us a little bit. And I'm just trying to say just to go ahead and challenge those things. Because think about, if you've been around, like the expectations of the preacher was to always wear a tie, right? And if they showed up without that, you kind of wondered. They were from California or maybe Vermont. But now, we're way beyond that to the full untucked, image, right? But there probably was a day where you might have felt like, no, they really should dress a certain way, or earrings, or body piercing, or tattoos. Think of all those things that are maybe become a little more normal and really not controversial that sometime might have been. And we can get really upset about some of those things because it's immovable. That shouldn't change. It should be this way. And you kind of realize, all right, maybe I need to change a little bit. And I'm feeling that way after almost 30 years of ministry. Sometimes I start to feel like I know what we should do. But we're all trying to reach a moving target. Paul said, I become all things to all men or all people so that in every way I may win some to Christ. He takes a step towards people. So rather than be incredulous or maybe skeptical of who they are, embracing those things, because that's who we are. That's what the church is on mission, is to love others and just accept them for who they are. Knowing that Christ will do the work in their life, but our job is to love them and bring them in. And that can be hard when we hold some of these things as immovable in our lives, that we should just move on even in some of those things. And that was just one of the things that I thought about and really appreciated the part about Paul, just being willing to let go of his Pharisaical Jewish background to go to the Gentiles, which is something he would never, ever do. But talk about a cross-cultural ministry, reaching out beyond what was comfortable for him. And that's just it. It's uncomfortable sometimes. I know it. We all feel that. But that's what, as men, as leaders, we need to be willing to do that and take that first step. The second part, where it says immovable, we should be immovable again about the core doctrine of our faith, but we should still be moved as a person. I have always described myself as a stoic Vermonter, and I think there's a certain reputation of the, what was it people call the frozen chosen? Something kind of like the nature of someone you might meet in a New England region who calls himself a Christian. I grew up in a home that we celebrated the high times and the good times, but my mother's influence on our family meant we never would really go to the sad things. We weren't really allowed, if I could say it that way, express the hard things in life because those were sad and we don't want to dwell on those things. And she had a background that would explain it. And I realized later that because I never expressed those emotions growing up, it caused me that struggle to express other emotions. You can't just kind of close off one part of your emotional life and expect every other part of it to be healthy. And this is something even in the last few years that I've gotten help with, to understand that I am an emotional person. I should be moved by things that happen. I should be able to relate to people on an emotional level. But my strongest suit is more of a thinking, analytical person. That's how the Lord's made me. But it's not a reason for me not to be moved by the things that I should be moved by. To mourn with those who mourn and celebrate those who celebrate. And it really came to be more clear for me when everything was happening with the war in Ukraine and seeing people suffering on both sides, and having them come and move into our home and our community, I had to just allow myself to try to be sympathetic, to try to feel a little bit like they were feeling. It was uncomfortable, but I had to let myself go there. And it's been such I'll say a breakthrough, or such a refreshing thing for me. And I'm 55, so we can still learn things. Some of you are further ahead of me. Because on a spiritual level, I want my heart to break for the things that break the heart of the Lord. I want to know how I should be approaching whatever it is that's broken, or the injustice, or whatever it is. I don't want to just write it off intellectually. And as men, it's a lot easier for us to talk on that level, on the intellectual level, on the hunting firearm level, on the lawn care level, sports. We go there. But to talk about the things that are more on a soul level, first we have to be in touch with that heart to understand where we are, to be able to connect on it. And it is easier for some of us than others. We would typically say that's a thing a woman would do more easily, and maybe that's a little bit more how God has naturally wired the maternal instinct. But yet, as I try to relate to my kids, that they're grown, they're working, they're defining their own lives, I need to be able to connect to them on that emotional level. Otherwise, I miss out on that part of the relationship. And that'd be true with my wife or other people that I meet. And so the Lord's really been working on my heart to think about that. What should be moved? What are the things that are maybe my opinions or preferences that are getting in the way? And then where should my heart be moved towards other people and things around me, that I can kind of mourn with those who mourn and celebrate with those who celebrate? Because it's really been a difficult path. And as men, we can struggle with this whole emotional side of our lives. And again, I don't think I'll ever be described as an emotional person, but I need to be able to develop that part of my life because the Lord's put that in me. And I've tried to learn how to bring that out. And so that's my encouragement to you, is to just to think about what is the Lord working on in your life, and what would be the way that He could help to grow you in a way that you could be connecting to others, that you could be, as we would say, on mission to connect with others for Christ. And it's uncomfortable. And Paul said in our own experiences, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself along the way, that's where we learn the most, because we have to trust the Lord to meet us there. But that brings us to the very end of the passage again. Because it says, when we're abounding with the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. It's worth it. We don't always see the results of those things. It can take a while. I had the pleasure yesterday of going to visit Ben Lamb. I don't know if you know the Lambs, Bev and Ben, but these are people that have been in my life since I was a little kid, and had a chat with him. And I was asking him about the choices that you make, and the advice that you give, and the initiative you take to people. How do you deal with the fact that you don't always see the results? And Ben's struggling in a lot of ways, but he looked at me and he said that he quoted something that I think you might recognize, because it's from someone who's very quotable, the quotable coach, Yogi Berra. He said, I heard one time that, or he said this basically, that when you get to the fork in the road, you just take it. And it's a little bit out of context, but the idea that we don't always know what to do when you come to that fork in the road, and he's like, just go. Don't stop. Don't get stuck there. Because if you go this way or if you go that way, whatever that decision may be, and the Lord's bigger than our best decisions and our worst decisions. He can make it work out. And we fret over that sometimes. We don't need to. It's easy to do. I like to analyze, and I'll just stop at that fork in the road and just stay right there happily. But as Ben just basically said, you know, because I was asking how he relates to his kids and how he sees the results of his parenting, especially as an adult, he goes, you know what? I don't always know what to do, and sometimes you don't see the results until a generation later. He goes, my kids maybe didn't want to take my advice, but then I see them using my advice with their own kids. And so that's the part where we don't always see what's happening, but it's not in vain. Whether it's in this context or another, the Lord can still bless it. And so I just wanted to start with that as a little perspective. Maybe we're a little heavy for a Saturday morning, but you came, and here I am. And so let me pray, and then go ahead and come up and we can chat a little bit. Lord Jesus, we want to be growing and changing, and we want you to move us in directions where we need to grow. And we want to be immovable about things that are true of our faith, that we should defend and that we should communicate. But we want to know too, Lord Jesus, that you're with us and that you can bless our best and our worst decisions, because we want to serve you in whatever way that may be. And if it is to better connect to those that we want to try to reach and we're working with in our lives on that emotional level, that we would take the risk to ask those difficult questions that feel uncomfortable, because it helps us to relate to each other in a way that reflects the body of Christ helping each other to grow and mature and to develop. And so it's for your kingdom that really any of this is possible. And so we work towards that together as men, as leaders, as those given a responsibility to do so. And I pray that you would bless our efforts, small and large, and help us give us that confidence that comes from knowing you. In your name, Jesus, we pray.
For that word, Keith. So I thought that it would be nice for us to kind of get to know Keith a little bit better, and what better way to do that than through some Q&A. And so I have some questions. We'll do kind of like an interview style Q&A, and then we'll open it up to you guys that may have questions about, for Keith and his ministry. So Keith, maybe we could just start with a little bit more about Cru. And so historically, Cru's primary vision and mission was, on the university and college campuses, but it seems like Cru has now broadened. I know that there's the Jesus film, there's adult professional athletic and ministries for high school students. Can you talk a little bit about what Cru does? It's grown quite a bit.
Yeah, and what was known as Campus Crusade for Christ, because in 1951, just with a student ministry, the idea of student and crusade was somewhat normal at that time. And as things have grown to really cover many, many different audiences, the name really wasn't helping. And so there was a name change just to Cru, and doesn't stand for anything. It's just, whatever you want. The reality is that it's every country that we work in, they have their own name for themselves. And so I don't really pay much attention to it. But my wife, Lori, her responsibility on a global level is to help to give leadership to all of these ministries that focus on leaders in their workplace or in their position. So the diplomatic community, I'll stretch it even further, with sports, even the family ministry, teaching ministry, musicians ministry, all of those things. It's really, globally, it's the initiative of a national ministry. So the ministry in Moldova wants to start a work with athletes, or we'll say musicians. And so they would work through our leadership structure to Lori or her representative in Europe to say, how do we do that? And then to see if it fits their audience, and then to help them grow in that outreach. And so in Eastern Europe, actually, the ministry to teachers is quite large, and it's been going on since the early 90s as an example. But all of those things are really just focused on evangelism and discipleship. So the audiences have grown, but the purpose or the central focus of the organization hasn't changed. And so that helps keep it simple.
Thanks for that clarification, Keith. Now, Pastor Scott introduced you on Sunday as being the leader or leader development person for all of Europe. And so, talk a little bit about what that entails, and maybe also talk about some of the common challenges that ministry leaders are currently facing in Europe.
So, over the years, myself or Lori, we fit into different ministry roles. And if you've been following our ministry, you're aware of this. Especially working with students for the first 20 years or so, we really felt like that was what the Lord put us on our heart. And then we saw, especially internationally, the lack of new leaders being developed to start that new ministry with athletes or with the church. There's nobody there who could give initiative and lead that. And so we shifted, and specifically for me, to do more about the teaching and training of our missionary staff in Europe. And so we have about 1,300 missionary staff, or however you want to call them, and most of them are European. So the era of all the Americans, especially going in, especially to Eastern Europe, is I won't say over, but it's nothing like it was. We probably are around 95% of our staff are from Europe, working in Europe. And so if I'm going to be there, there better be a good reason, honestly. And this is where I see the challenge is helping Zbyszek in Poland. And this is just a short example. Our ministry in Poland started in the 1980s, very covertly, and had grown for a long time. And currently we had a leader, his name is Zbyszek, and he's been leading for about 8 years and giving some indication that he wanted to just go actually do work with athletes. And he came to me a year ago and said, we need a new leader. Could you help that process to find a new leader and find someone? And so this is where I step in with the national ministry, and we go through, there's a hiring process, but it's not like, hey, we have this salary and all these people apply. We're saying this is probably one of the most difficult jobs because you're the national director of a ministry, the buck stops with you, all the legal challenges, all the ministry challenges, the personnel challenges will end up. And we went through the process and realized that there was nobody, that he had not been involved in developing anyone else. And I had done what I could, I'll say, over the years seeing that. And in tears, he said, I'm sorry, I have not been able to prepare anyone to take over my role. And we were honestly quite stuck. And we've solved it for a temporary period of time. So that just, talk about breaking your heart. That just breaks my heart when I see someone, they want out of a role, they're feeling called to something else, and they're stuck because there's no one to fill that in, to come in behind them. So just team leadership development, theological development, understanding how to lead in a servant leader as Christ would, is really difficult, leader to leader. And then across Europe, it's going to look different in Bulgaria than it does in France. And so that's for me, understanding that too. I work on a principal level and then typically work with the national leadership teams of those countries to make sure that their staff are growing and developing. Just because it's too important what we're doing to let that go. Because if they're not growing and developing, they start looking more inwardly, and we end up like anybody with conflict and challenges that distract us from the mission. And so if I had a very basic goal, if I can at least stop that from happening, I feel like I've made a difference.
That's really good. Thanks for that. I don't know if my battery ran out of power here or something, but it's red.
We can hear you.
You can hear me, okay. So February 24th. So Russia invades Ukraine. Talk to us a little bit about what that day was like for you and your wife, and what was that day like for you in the context of your ministry?
When Russia started to amass troops, especially on the northern border towards Kiev, we saw something happening, and then the U.S. government, other governments started pulling their people out, diplomatic missions. So I bought a plane ticket to go to Ukraine because I felt like nothing is going to happen. This is really, it's just emotionally hard for them because everyone's leaving them in a moment of crisis, so to speak. And so I want to go there and just show up because sometimes that's just what you do. And so I was shocked with everybody else that obviously I didn't go. And yeah, the hard part for me about it is to know the why question. And you can ask the why question on a lot of human levels or economic levels or whatever, but on a spiritual level, it's such a great place for the gospel to grow and be sent out. Like, why would this happen to stop it? Maybe it's like the persecution in the first century Church of Christianity. I don't want to go there necessarily, but Ukraine has been really just like a Bible belt of the former Soviet Union. Just pastors and teachers have been brought up in the ministries and the seminaries there and sent out around the region. And obviously, this kind of stops all that from happening or accelerates it, I'm not sure. But when we saw this happening, those of us who live in Budapest and our other staff, like I said, we have a lot of 1,300 staff around the region, basically put the word out that, if you're prepared to help them come out, if it does come to this point, people need to leave, that we want to be able to help them. And so on March 2nd, I got a message from the national director, Sasha, and I'd already talked to two Sashas, you have to be careful, and they're both last names with a Z, which, by the way, come on now, go there. I got a message and said, hey, are you thinking of coming? I'm writing to both families, and one's like, no, we're fine, they're down in the west and southwest, in a place they felt they were safe. The other's a family of 6, and they were jammed into an apartment because the whole country was moving west, and there were, days-long backups on the roads, and they'd all dealt with that. And he's like, no, we're not really sure yet. I think we're okay. And then 2 days later, I just wrote, hey, did anything change? And he just said, I've just crossed the border into Hungary. We'll be at your house in an hour and a half. And I was like, okay. And I honestly, when they pulled up, I didn't know what to say. I mean, what do you say? They had a few bags on the roof of their car. They picked up somebody else who could only bring a little, like a backpack, a small backpack, because they were riding in someone else's car, and that was it. And that's where they've been. So they were one of the families that couldn't get out because they have a special family kind of exclusion from the military. 3 children under the age of 18, the fathers are free to not serve and essentially leave the country. So we have a few families like that moved out, and then on quite a few moms with kids, and the dads are doing their part, either in ministry or in the war. So yeah, it changed everything.
And so when you go back this week, this family will still be at your house?
They just moved out.
Oh, they moved out. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
They're staying for a whole school year. They have they have older kids in like high school level, and they entered the school actually where our kids went to school, because their school in Kiev closed. It's actually a similar type of a school. So they just need their own place, honestly. And so we were happy to have them for 6 months, but they also felt like they needed to move on. So they have another place, and so I'm looking forward to seeing them. They're not only colleagues but they're friends. And yeah, we'll have to see. There's 25 new students from Ukraine at the school, and so that's going to change the community. Yeah, and at the same time, and I'll just add this, that 12 years in Russia means that we have a lot of friends in Russia. And quietly, I've been getting some requests to help them leave Russia, which I get. And I just don't, it's a little bit outside of my expertise, but it's like, where do you go? And there are a lot of want to be in Europe somewhere. And I mentioned a couple of you this morning, about 4 this morning, I got a text from Mariana. And she's Russian with her husband, Semyon. And Semyon apparently was in Budapest. I didn't know it. And apparently some people heard him speaking Russian, and they grabbed him and they beat him up and pepper sprayed him on the street. And usually Hungary is pretty mild with this kind of stuff. And so I think there's stories like that going on too, where he's out of the country for just his own reasons, and yet it's not a safe haven for him. So that the whole punishing Russia and sanctions has been obviously very difficult for our ministry to operate there, but it's designed to do something else, which we all hope it does. So it's a very odd situation to be in, both countries.
And I'll have one final question, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A for you guys to ask Keith some questions here. But my final question, Keith, is how have you seen God working in the midst of this crisis in Europe?
The warm welcome that a lot of the European countries have provided for the refugees leaving, I think is really heartwarming, I guess you could say, the motivation. Churches have rallied to demonstrate that love for those people that they've never met but know that they are in need. And so that's helpful just because, they're in a very difficult situation. And actually I heard about a Ukrainian family moving into Cambridge, Vermont. Somehow there was some sort of a sponsorship. I just met somebody yesterday who told me about that. So, there's Ukrainians everywhere. You're going to know there's a lot of flags around. People are flying that they might have thought they'd only have to put up for a short period of time, and then 6 months later they might need to buy a second flag to keep it going. But good things can come of this. When former Yugoslavia was breaking up and there was all this stuff happening in the Balkans, it was a great opportunity for ministry. Sometimes these types of things are a great opportunity for ministry because people have nothing else to trust in, so they're thinking, well, I might try faith. And so there's just great opportunities in both Russia and Ukraine right now for ministry. And so I'm encouraged by that. We have 137 staff, and most of them are still in Ukraine, wanting to do something. And so they're going to be busy. These are the type of people that we attract. They're very motivated. And so there's great stories of them just going to some of these villages and helping them with something. I talked about the yellow boxes that they're delivering with just some hope and what's tangible. And then sometimes just listening and talking and praying with somebody is what they really need, without promising anything, but just to be there with them. So I'm encouraged by those things. At the same time, I'm really distraught that it's happening. It's both and. And so that's what I'm excited to go back and to be a little more connected to it. But at the same time, it's still going on. Very difficult.
Thanks for that, Keith. So I want to open up the floor to questions. Maybe you guys have, you've been seeing Keith coming every year and haven't had an opportunity to ask him some questions that may be on your mind. So please.
Why Europe?
You mean for me personally?
Yes.
Yeah. It's odd that the way it worked, because we went to Central Asia first, Uzbekistan. At that time, in the late 90s, we studied Russian. So when we felt like it was time to move on from there for various legal and political and oppression that was happening, we had to get out. Going to Russia was easy because Russian. And then our later years there, I started to see that the need for developing our missionary leadership around the region was becoming one of the biggest priorities that was holding us back from what we would call self-sustaining industries, where they didn't need all the help from outside. And so our regional office was in Budapest, Hungary. And so we moved there to be part of a leadership team for all of Eastern Europe at the time. And then in this last year, organizationally, Eastern Europe and Western Europe have been combined, and I was asked to continue in that role. So it's kind of like it chose me than me choosing it, so to speak. I see a lot more of the tangibility in Eastern Europe and the things that are happening there. I'm really learning how to help the ministry in Germany, for example, because it's completely different. And so I'm maybe a little more motivated by helping the eastern side of the region because I see the needs. The Western European side, I'm not sure, honestly, how to help them so much. And that's okay. If they don't need my help, then I don't need to do anything for them. So it's kind of why we ended up in Europe. But, yeah, good question.
Ryan.
So would you say the Western Europe side of business, that because organization is functioning well?
The fruit from the ministry in Western Europe is much harder to come by. And so they've started to develop strategies like humanitarian aid organizations and mentoring, coaching plans that sometimes get government funding, which doesn't really allow them to share the gospel. You kind of go why are you doing that? You know, I was not a part of the leadership of that part of the ministry at all, and so some of it, I'm hopeful that the very creative ministry strategies from Eastern Europe could start to influence the Western Europe. So what I really want to do is to get some cross-pollination and to see what we can do, because the ministries in Western Europe honestly are not really grown. They've flattened out in a lot of the places, and so they've done things that they can do, but it really doesn't really seem to fit, like you asked. It doesn't really seem to fit what our organization's about. And so I'm just I want to be able to ask some questions. I don't want to make an opinion about it yet, but I just want to ask more questions, like, why do you do that, and have you thought about this? And maybe I could help. I'm an American, which they kind of feel like, oh, you're another American, but because I've been in the region so long, I feel more maybe Eastern European. And my Russian friends would always introduce me as, yeah, Keith, he's American, but he's not really, it's okay. I kind of felt like that was a compliment. So what does that mean for like a Western European context? I'm not sure. But they haven't got it all figured out, but I think they've been lulled into a sense that this is just all we can do. And so that's a little sad.
And it's not unlike geographical differences in this country. That's my point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to follow up to Brian's question, Keith, do you find that Eastern Europeans are more receptive to the gospel in the West?
I'm not sure. I think our ministry in Eastern Europe is much more clearly focused on developing the local church, sharing the gospel, being about student ministries and things like that. So there's more fruit from that, and so maybe there's more receptivity. But I think it has to do with what they're fishing for, so to speak. What they're going after defines what you end up catching, right? And so in Western Europe, it feels like they're just, I don't understand what they're going after, honestly. And it's not everywhere. I'm painting a very broad picture. So I want to learn and see if I can help. It's somewhat outside of my realm, but ministry strategy kind of is very important for me also, and so I want to just do whatever I can.
Dennis?
Hey, Keith. So first of all, I just want to say I appreciate you and your ability to be empathetic and inclusive. You and Amy had reached out to me when I was a kid, and I'm not really be a Christian. On that theme, we live in a very exclusive place. Not a lot of diversity, not a lot of inclusivity. Since high school, being, before you left and all that, how has your perspective of this region, particularly the United States, changed, like, in your mind, as far as that aspect, the lack of, including a diverse population?
Well, thanks, Dennis. That's a good question. And it's easy to look at a place like Vermont and say it's not a diverse place on the surface, but the reality is that we are all very diverse, and we have to be able to understand from where we come from how we are different. And that's kind of part of that idea that I was saying earlier, that to be open and curious about other people and not assume that we're all the same. Because if there's anything I've learned over the years is there's a lot of richness in being someone who feels like they're a little on the outside. I mean, I've lived in all these places the last 25 years. I'm not a local. I've always felt on the outside. And for those that would just be curious in my direction, it was really helpful. Say, hey, where are you from? Tell me about that, whatever, rather than have a preconceived notion. And this happened in Russia probably more than anything. Oh, you're American, therefore, blah, 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 blah. And it was always a difficult situation. But when someone would really ask and want to learn, it was really encouraging to me. And a lot of us are from different places, even Texas, that, it's okay to learn about that, because we can each bring something different because of that. And so I think we need to be comfortable with that. Sometimes it just feels more comfortable to be around people who are just like us. But you don't learn you just kind of start to get ingrown, I guess. So if that's a little bit of my perspective. But I was just in Canada, in Ontario, and Canada has always been very open for immigration and stuff. And we were in this small place about 2 hours east of Toronto, and it was like the whole world was passing by. People were just coming by from all these walks of life. That, I don't know, I just really enjoyed that. I mean, for me, that just was great because I've been to a lot of those places and I can appreciate those cultures. But sometimes people feel uncomfortable because of someone being different. But it's okay to be curious. I love it when someone has like a bunch of tattoos. I love asking the question, can you tell me about your tattoos? Because they're there for a reason, and there's usually a story. And so that person who'd be very different than me suddenly was like, hey, can you just tell me what that's about? I'm really curious. Often they're very happy to talk about it.
Dan had a question.
In Ukraine, I don't know too much about it, but what's it like interacting with the traditional denominations there, the Russian Orthodox or Catholic, Ukrainian Rite, or for that matter, other missionaries from other Christian denominations? What's that like in relationship? Is it competitive? How do you all get along?
It's a good question. And I would say, as representing a very large organization, we for years kind of felt like we could do whatever we wanted to do with our own resources. And about 10 years ago, there was a big turn going, no, it's about us cooperating and us just doing what we do well, and then cooperating with the rest that do the other parts. And so, like, the Christian Missionary Alliance is really known for church planting and starting schools around the world. And so we'll partner easily with an organization like the CNNA. And so that happens in Ukraine. I think it happens well. And one of the reasons it does is, so what's known as Russian Orthodoxy actually came from Ukraine originally, way back, okay? But what happened was, there's obviously a long history, but the Orthodoxy in Russia became connected to their cultural identity and then their political power. Ukraine, it didn't go that way. There was much more freedom to develop other aspects of faith. And so the Catholic, the Reformed Catholic, different Protestant denominations, the Baptists are huge there. So it's much more even, and therefore more like, hey, let's bring it together. Whereas in Russia, because of the Orthodox Church being, what they recognize, they don't say we recognize Christianity. They'll say Islam and Buddhism, and then Orthodoxy, not Christianity. So that's always been not getting along well together situation. And the Russian Baptist is the largest denomination. They're always dealing with stuff from the government, negative-wise. They're called the blood drinkers because the body of the blood of Christ, that we would say in communion, and then they've taken that to say they drink blood. You don't want to go there. Literally, tell people that. And they believe it. But in Ukraine, it's much more cooperative, a lot more happening. Seminaries stay open, they don't get shut down by the government, and things like that. And so it's been a great picture of that body of Christ working together. Good question.
Yeah, my brother taught at the Ukrainian Catholic Red Seminary in Connecticut there.
Oh, really? That's great.
I'm just curious, do you ever interact with, like, where is the Ukrainian community strong? Obviously down there.
I don't know. It's hard for me to say.
Any other questions for Keith?
Yeah, you mentioned seminaries. What kind of training are you giving to the locals to become pastoral leaders in the developing churches?
So there's a couple of different things. Depending on where we come in contact with someone, whether it's at the high school or the college age, we're training them in basic ministry skills and then giving them opportunities to take classes and stuff if they wish to grow in that direction. And so some of them do end up going into, we want them to be involved in a local church anyway, and that may lead them into staying in the church. At the same time, we have a specific strategy for church planting that It's more like using a discipleship group and then training a few people to be able to lead in a small church context, more like house churches. And that's globally, but it's also happening around Europe too. And so, but that's not about our people being the pastors, no. It's about helping to equip someone to be the pastor of those small communities. Heck, it could grow, it could close, we don't know, but the idea is that it would grow quickly and then develop others. And so, yeah, and we've had traditionally a theological team that would travel, or now it's pretty much by Zoom, to teach courses for those that would really need to, but at the same time, I mean, you can get so much from the internet if you just find the right places. You've got to be careful, obviously, but there's a lot that people can learn on their own, and so they're less dependent on what we provide and more independent on what they can find, which is good.
Thank you. Hi. So given that you straddle multiple worlds, what are the key things learned in Western Europe over the past couple of years, given the global pandemic stuff in Ukraine and so on, that like the church has thrived through, and what lessons could we draw over here from some of those things?
You mean like trends?
Well, not trends, more like what, how anything comes, what can we learn from the other, from what's happening over there that would benefit us? Because you mentioned how if we tend to learn from other people, right? That's not assuming that we all know what's best and all that. It's like, okay, super there, and it's like not really well, or better not try that for these reasons. So like, what are the like key learnings you share? Because we, people myself, like I don't know how the church there handled the past couple of years, and what are lessons you could draw for the younger church?
That's insightful. And I'm struggling to give you a good answer because I'm not sure. I mean, I love to learn and gather information. And the pandemic was very similar as far as what had happened to the church, and very similar now, where people maybe not coming back or have gone off somewhere else. And the quiet quitting is this word that I keep hearing. It's terrible, like all the time. I don't know. It's just like people kind of just slinking off or disappearing, or different contexts of that. But I think something I've seen though is just the idea that this is an opportunity to kind of reset, to try something different, because it's kind of like, all right, it just stopped, it kind of, whatever it was kind of died, and then you have an opportunity to try something new. And so in a church context, it can be a new ministry, or even just how you do church on a weekend, or what the church provides. I mean, a lot of churches are struggling with kind of the idea, do we continue to do the online streaming or not? And I heard from one pastor, he says, we do it, but we have a really bad quality stream, so it encourages people to actually show up. I don't know if that's the right way to go. But I think in Western Europe, the church is largely irrelevant to people. Just because it's been around so long, it's kind of seen as this traditional thing that has not changed to meet the needs or answer the questions that people are asking today. And that's where the Eastern European thing is, it's only been around really one generation, 30 years. And so it's still very nimble and able to pivot and to change to help reach a moving target. And so I think that's part of it, is that being willing to change and try things. They may work or they don't work, but we don't know. We learn from either. We learn more from our mistakes, right? And so that's what I think I've seen, is a similar struggle, but the more nimble, younger church that I see across Eastern Europe has been quicker to readapt into things. And in Western Europe, it's probably more struggling in that regard. Just being seen as being irrelevant. So that might be similar.
Thanks for that, Clay. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Rob?
With the technology today, do you foresee yourself coming back to the States and operating from here, even though you're still working in Europe?
That's a perfect question.
Well, I mean, it's different.
Because your kids are back here. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, they are for now. I
Yeah.
mean, with the Navy, who knows where my daughter's going to end up, and my son wants to go to the Middle East to continue to study Arabic, and who knows with that. But I mean, I've been in the States for 4 months, which is a long time, and 2 of them were sabbaticals, so that doesn't really count. But even during sabbatical and stuff, I don't feel like I missed that much on the ground. I mean, it means that this Thursday I had a call from 4 to 6 a.m. because that was 10 a.m. in Europe. And so I joined that call, and it's just like we were all meeting by Zoom anyway. So the number of face-to-face meetings has gone way, way, way down. And so I'm going back this week on Wednesday, next week I guess, depending on any kind of weeks. But and I have a face-to-face meeting in October that I've tried really hard to get people to come to. And quite a few were like, no, that's okay. I'm like, really? You know, like, no, we're fine. Why spend the money and time to do that? We'll just stay here. And then they'll always, we can't really come, but could you just, you know, put a camera up so we can just join on and off based on the topics that we're going to talk about. It's hard not to take it personal. So what I'm learning is, yeah, I could probably do a lot what I'm doing right now from a distance, and maybe even live in the U.S. and work there. Lori's ministry is global, and we've always said this, she just needs to be near an airport, because she travels more than I do. And so, yeah, so the idea of like, as we typically say, oh, you're a missionary in this part of the world, and you're like, yeah, but I happen to live here. And so living in one place and ministering in the other, depending on your role, it's become much more flexible. And so it's kind of like one of those questions of the heart right now for me, like, could I do that, and what would I do? And I'm not quite ready to chase our kids around, but maybe we'd come back for a while and try it out. Yeah, I don't know, any advice?
Phil?
Well, but I'm kind of following up though, but from your tone of voice, I could almost get the implication that there must be some benefit of meeting in person. I mean, I believe meeting in person is much more rich than Zoom. I mean, so by pulling yourself out of there, then you're sort of making a step more toward a technological meeting and not really encouraging a personal meeting, which I got out of the sense of your communication. That would have been, it is better to head toward getting back to personal meeting.
So what's happened compared to 20 years ago, where obviously when something happened, you'd show up and get others to show up with you. 2 things have happened since then. One is we can do a lot more by technology, depending on what it is, especially if a relationship's already established. But 2, the development of the countries, the ministries in the countries that I'm working with has gone so far that they're asking for far less. So, you know, you think about working yourself out of a job, right? That's kind of the foreign missionary mantra. And that's kind of more and more what I see. And so what I do see is that if there are occasional trips, and so if I was living further away, I would just add a few stops and organize my time that way, if that's what I had to do. And I have a few colleagues that are already doing that, and it seems to be okay. So, yeah, and I've always thought, oh, I mean, I'm an hour away, I could just get on a flight and I'll be in Moldova or Macedonia or whatever, but they're not asking or anything. They're not asking you to show up, they want to meet, they have a specific question, they want some advice, and then we just see what happens. So that part's really changed. And I mean, it's good for budgets, honestly, not having to spend as much money on travel. There's another side of it. So there's a good tension of the value of going and the value of just staying home, saving time and money on everybody's parts. And so just trying to learn from that. Leverage technology. I mean, I love to use technology if it's helpful. And you know, sometimes it is. But.
One last question. Go ahead, Gary.
How much has Christianity advanced since you started being missionary? And what's changed since the Russian invasion on Christianity and how far it goes? Loaded question, but you just answered.
I think you hold me in too great esteem to that question. I mean, like I said, talking to our Russian ministry staff, they've said that the opportunities for ministry have grown. So that's, again, like war and political questions and things like that are usually good for ministry, good for the gospel. So are the results growing? They're saying they're seeing more fruit from what they're doing. We still have young people asking to join our ministry, even in Ukraine, this spring. There were 2 people who asked to join the ministry full-time, which I think that's surprising. So, yes, the church is growing. It's not necessarily the traditional church in a big building. It's almost like what you see in different places. It meets in a school, meets in someone's home, smaller groups distributed, doing things more uniquely. That's what's growing. And that's certainly what you see growing in parts of the world where we don't hear reports of the church growing, like in the Far East in China, or in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Iran especially, house church things are growing like crazy. And so that is happening, but it's not meant to be publicized, and so that's the part where I'm not even sure sometimes what I see. Lori actually has a larger view globally, but in Eastern Europe it's definitely growing, and that's encouraging to me. Western Europe, again, I'm kind of learning. I'm not as sure. So yeah, hopefully that helps. So I mean, I'm optimistic, but there's a lot of work to be done. So the idea of, like your question, why Europe? I mean, it could be one of those things to come back to. It's like, well, it's not part of the world's generally Christian. There's lots of churches, but if they're empty, then that's a problem. So how do you re-infuse that? And is that a greater priority than other parts of the Middle East with the 1040 window that's completely unreached? I don't know.
Thank you, Keith. Guys, so Keith will be hanging around, I'm sure, a little bit. So if you have more questions, I'm sure he'd be willing to engage you with that. Would you guys give Keith a round of applause?
Well, thank you all for your questions and your engagement. It's good for me to talk about. Appreciate it.
Oh, that's not good. That'll do. All right, thanks.
Well, let me get one too, then.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to do a little wider.
There we go.
All right, I got everybody. Look at everybody. 1, 2, 3. A little bit more. All right.
All right, thanks, Keith.
Hey, Keith, would you close us out in prayer, please, before you step down?
Sure. Lord, we each came here for different reasons this morning. And I thank you for just the pleasure of being together and for the opportunities to, whatever it is that we're facing, whatever it is that we're involved with, that we're not alone. And I just pray that we would take that risk to, in the confidence that you give us to be real with each other, you give us the confidence to do that with each other. And that this wouldn't just be something we come together for a meal and chit-chat, but that it would be meaningful and I would say useful in our lives, Jesus, and you would use this group for things much greater than what we see here. For the relationships, for the opportunities, for the ideas that flow. You continue to give Dwight and others creativity in their leadership and a value that gets added into our lives as we walk about the journey of following you. Stumbling, falling, getting back up with the help of others. Continue on. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
I have several announcements, guys. Don't go just yet.